Her immediate reaction was to laugh, thinking it was some kind of joke. But his serious demeanor didn't waver. "You're offering me a job? You don't even know me," she said, crossing her arms. "I know enough," he replied smoothly. "You're here, working hard, despite whatever life is throwing at you. That tells me you're resilient. I don't need a resume to see that." Nina didn't know what to say. The man exuded an air of confidence and authority, the kind that made her instinctively trust him even as her brain screamed to be cautious. "What kind of job are we talking about?" she asked, her skepticism clear. His jaw tightened slightly, as though he disliked explaining himself. "I'm paraplegic. I need someone to assist me with basic tasks, bathing, dressing, managing my schedule. My previous caregiver quit last week. It's demanding work, and I don't have the patience for incompetence." Nina's initial reaction was to refuse outright. The thought of bathing a stranger, let alone someone as intense as this man, made her uncomfortable. But then she thought of Ethan. His medical bills. The treatments he needed but couldn't afford. "How much does it pay?" she asked hesitantly. $5,000 a month, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Her breath caught. $5,000? That was more than she made in 6 months at the diner. It could change everything for her and Ethan. But the implications of the job, its demands and the vulnerability it required, made her hesitate. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Victor Langston," he said, extending a hand. Nina stared at his hand for a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, despite his condition. "This is a lot to process," she admitted. Victor nodded. "Take your time. But I need an answer by tomorrow." He handed her a business card and wheeled himself out of the diner without another word. That night, Nina sat at her kitchen table, the card in her hand. Ethan was asleep in the next room, his soft breathing punctuated by the occasional cough. She stared at the name on the card, Victor Langston. It sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. A quick internet search revealed everything. Victor was a billionaire tech entrepreneur who had been paralyzed in a car accident 3 years ago. Since then, he had retreated from the public eye, managing his empire quietly from the shadows. Nina's mind raced. The job was strange, yes, but it wasn't illegal or immoral. And the money, she couldn't ignore what it could do for Ethan. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What kind of man was Victor Langston? Would he be impossible to work for? The next day, she called him. "I'll take the job," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Victor didn't sound surprised. "Good. Be at my estate tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." As she hung up, Nina couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world It was a gray morning in the small, bustling town of Lakeview, the kind of day where the sky seemed perpetually on the verge of rain. Nina Harris was already running late. Her old sedan sputtered as she pulled into the diner's cramped parking lot, steam hissing from under the hood. The car, much like her life, seemed to be holding together by sheer willpower. She let out a frustrated sigh and grabbed her worn handbag, crammed with overdue bills and medical forms, before rushing toward the diner's entrance. Inside, the clamor of breakfast service was in full swing. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, mingling with the buzz of chatter and the clinking of cutlery. Nina tied her apron hastily and jumped into her shift. Her face wore a practiced smile, but her mind was elsewhere, on her son, Ethan. He was home with a fever again. 7 years old and battling a rare autoimmune disorder, Ethan's health was a constant worry. The medical bills were piling up faster than she could pay them, and the small tips she earned at the diner barely made a dent. By the time the lunch rush hit, Nina was exhausted. Her feet ached, and the endless demands of the job were starting to wear her down. That's when she noticed him. Sitting in the corner booth, away from the noise, was a man unlike any of her usual customers. He was immaculately dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His wheelchair, sleek and custom-made, was parked beside the table. He wasn't eating or drinking. Instead, he stared out the window with an expression that was equal parts frustration and melancholy. Nina approached with her notepad, her curiosity piqued. "Hi there, can I get you anything?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. The man turned his gaze to her, his piercing blue eyes assessing her for a moment. "Coffee." "Black," he said, his voice clipped and authoritative, as though he was used to giving orders. She nodded and hurried off to get his coffee, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back. When she returned, she placed the mug in front of him and hesitated. There was something about him, something that hinted at a story. "Rough day?" she ventured, trying to keep her tone light. He gave a humorless chuckle. "You could say that." Nina was about to walk away when he added, "What's your name?" She turned back, surprised. "Nina," she said cautiously. "Do you work here full-time, Nina?" he asked, his tone oddly serious for such a casual question. She frowned slightly, unsure where this was going. "Yeah, pretty much." "Why?" The man leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. "Because I'm looking for someone reliable. Someone who won't quit when things get difficult." Nina blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" He took a sip of his coffee and set the mug down carefully. "I need help. Personal assistance. Someone to handle daily tasks. It's not glamorous, but it pays well." Wasn't prepared for. But she had made her decision. For Ethan's sake, she would do whatever it took. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a journey that would change her life, and the lives of everyone around her, in ways she could never have imagined. The sun rose slowly over Lakeview, casting a pale orange glow over the quiet streets. Nina Harris stood outside the towering iron gates of the Langston estate, clutching her handbag tightly. She had barely slept the night before, her mind swirling with uncertainty and anxiety. The job offer had felt surreal, and now, standing before a sprawling mansion that looked like something out of a movie, it felt even more so. The intercom crackled, breaking her thoughts. "State your name," a crisp voice demanded. "It's Nina Harris," she replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The gates creaked open, and she stepped onto the paved driveway, flanked by manicured gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly. Every detail of the estate screamed wealth: perfectly trimmed hedges, a marble fountain, and the massive stone mansion looming ahead like a modern castle. Nina couldn't help but feel out of place. Her thrift store blouse and scuffed flats were a stark contrast to the opulence around her. A butler greeted her at the door, his demeanor formal but not unkind. "Mr. Langston is expecting you. This way, please." She followed him through the grand foyer, where sunlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating a spiral staircase and walls adorned with abstract art. It was a world she couldn't even imagine existing in before now. The butler led her to a spacious sitting room, where Victor Langston waited. Victor sat in his wheelchair by a large window overlooking the gardens. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting his features, chiseled, but hardened by years of what Nina could only guess was pain and disappointment. He wore a crisp shirt and tailored trousers, his appearance meticulous despite his condition. "You're on time," he said without turning to look at her. "You said 8 a.m. sharp," she replied, unsure whether it was a compliment or an expectation she'd barely met. Victor finally turned his chair to face her, his piercing blue eyes scanning her as if assessing her worth. "We'll start with a trial period. 1 week. If you can't handle it, you're free to leave. No hard feelings." Nina nodded. "That's fair." He gestured toward the butler, who handed her a folder. "This contains the terms of your employment, your responsibilities, and the house rules. Read it thoroughly. If you agree, sign it before the end of the day. She flipped through the folder briefly. The list of duties was extensive: bathing, dressing, helping him with transfers, managing his medications, and keeping his daily schedule organized. It wasn't surprising, but seeing it all laid out made her realize just how demanding the job would be. Victor's voice broke the silence. Let's get one thing straight, Nina. I'm not looking for a friend, a therapist, or someone to pity me. This is a job. Do it well, and we'll get along. Fail, and you're out. His tone was blunt, almost harsh, but Nina met his gaze without flinching. Understood, she said firmly. For the next hour, the butler, whose name she learned was Graham, gave her a tour of the mansion. The house was as intimidating on the inside as it was on the outside: endless hallways, rooms filled with antique furniture, and state-of-the-art technology integrated seamlessly into the decor. But the most striking room was Victor's. His bedroom was both luxurious and clinical. A hospital bed sat in the center, surrounded by medical equipment that hummed softly. Beside the bed was a sleek black desk cluttered with papers and monitors displaying stock market trends and business reports. It was a stark reminder of the life he led, a man confined physically but still controlling an empire. Nina's first task was to assist Victor with his morning routine. Graham showed her the ropes, demonstrating the use of the ceiling lift that transferred Victor from his bed to his wheelchair. He won't say it, but he values competence, Graham said quietly as they worked. Show him you're capable, and he'll respect you. But if you falter, he let the warning hang in the air. Victor watched silently as Nina adjusted the lift straps, his expression unreadable. Her hands trembled slightly, but she managed to secure him properly. As the lift moved, she kept her focus, refusing to let her nerves show. Once Victor was settled in his wheelchair, Nina helped him with his shirt and tie. It was an intimate task, and she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of discomfort and determination. Victor didn't speak, but she could sense his scrutiny, as if he were testing her resolve. The rest of the morning was a whirlwind. Nina organized his medication, sorted through his schedule, and prepared his lunch, all while trying to navigate the unfamiliar dynamics of working for a man who seemed to wield power effortlessly despite his physical limitations. By lunchtime, she was exhausted but determined to prove herself. Victor, however, remained aloof, offering no feedback or acknowledgement of her efforts. The first real challenge came in the afternoon. Victor had a video conference with his board of directors, and Nina was tasked with setting up the call. The technology was far more advanced than anything she'd used before, and Victor's impatience quickly became evident. "Do you even know what you're doing?" he snapped as she fumbled with the controls. "I'm figuring it out," she replied, her voice tight but calm. "Figuring it out isn't good enough," he said coldly. Nina bit back a retort, forcing herself to stay composed. After a few more minutes, she managed to get the system working. Victor didn't thank her, but the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes didn't go unnoticed. As the day went on, Nina began to notice glimpses of the man beneath the icy exterior. While sorting through his mail, she came across a stack of letters from various charities. She couldn't help but skim through them, noting the substantial donations he had made anonymously. It was a stark contrast to the image he projected, a man who claimed not to care about anyone. By the time her first day ended, Nina was drained. As she gathered her things to leave, Victor called out to her. "You did better than I expected," he said grudgingly. It wasn't exactly praise, but it was enough to give Nina a small sense of accomplishment. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing better than to push for more. As she drove home, her mind replayed the events of the day. Victor Langston was a man of contradictions, a ruthless businessman with a hidden streak of generosity, a paraplegic who still commanded the world's respect. And then there was the mystery of why he had chosen her for the job. Was it really just a matter of convenience, or was there something more? When she walked through the door of her small apartment, Ethan greeted her with a sleepy smile. "Mommy, you're home," he said weakly. Nina hugged him tightly, her exhaustion melting away. This was why she had taken the job, why she would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. For Ethan, she would face anything. Little did she know, her journey with Victor Langston was just beginning, and it would take her down a path she could never have anticipated, a path that would test her strength, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately change her life forever. The second day at Victor Langston's estate began with an eerie stillness. The air felt heavier somehow, and as Nina walked up the driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was sizing her up, much like its owner. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts about the task ahead. The money was her anchor, the reason she pushed through the gnawing discomfort and self-doubt. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about Ethan, his health, and the sliver of hope that she could give him a better life. Graham greeted her at the door with his usual formality, but there was a trace of something in his eyes today, curiosity, perhaps, or even subtle approval. "Mr. Langston is already awake," he informed her, motioning for her to follow. Victor was waiting in his bedroom, seated in his wheelchair, fully dressed in another sharp suit that seemed almost too pristine for someone who barely left his estate. The room, though lavish, carried an air of functionality. Every piece of furniture served a purpose, from the adjustable bed to the shelves lined with books and medical supplies. "You're 2 minutes early," Victor said without looking up from the tablet in his hands. Nina hesitated, unsure if this was a criticism or acknowledgement. "I thought it'd be better than being late," she replied cautiously. "Fair enough," he said, setting the tablet aside. "Let's see if you've learned anything from yesterday." Her first task was helping him with his morning routine again, transferring him from his bed to his wheelchair, assisting with grooming, and ensuring he was ready for the day. Nina had spent the night mentally rehearsing every step, determined not to fumble. This time, her hands didn't shake as she adjusted the lift straps. She moved with more confidence, and though Victor didn't say a word, she could feel his sharp eyes following her every move. Once he was in his wheelchair, she helped him shave, her hands steady as she guided the razor across his jawline. The intimacy of the task struck her again, but she pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on doing it right. When she was done, Victor inspected himself in the mirror and gave a small nod of approval. "You're improving," he said, his tone neutral but lacking the sharp edge it usually carried. Nina didn't know whether to thank him or simply accept the comment as it was. Instead, she moved on to her next task, organizing his paperwork. Victor's business dealings were extensive, and his desk was a battlefield of contracts, reports, and correspondence. As she sorted through the chaos, she couldn't help but notice the magnitude of his empire. This wasn't just a man managing his life from a wheelchair, this was someone who wielded influence across industries. Mid-morning brought the first challenge of the day. Victor had a meeting scheduled with a team of engineers working on one of his projects, a state-of-the-art prosthetic limb designed to revolutionize mobility for paraplegics. The meeting was to be held over a video call, and Nina's role was to ensure everything went smoothly. As the engineers appeared on the screen, their faces lit with excitement and anticipation, Victor's demeanor shifted. Gone was the stoic man confined to his chair, in his place was a leader, sharp and commanding. He dissected their ideas with precision, asking questions that left them scrambling for answers but also pushing them to think deeper. Nina watched from the sidelines, impressed despite herself. This was a man who had every reason to be bitter, yet he was channeling his energy into something that could change lives, not just his own, but countless others. For a brief moment, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when one of the engineers mentioned the potential of the prosthetic limb to restore a semblance of independence. After the meeting ended, Victor's energy seemed drained, though he didn't let it show. "You're quiet today," he remarked, breaking the silence as Nina cleared away the remnants of his lunch. "I didn't think you'd appreciate small talk," she replied honestly. Victor chuckled, a dry, almost reluctant sound. "You're not wrong. But I do appreciate observation. What did you think of the meeting?" Caught off guard, Nina hesitated. "I think you're tough on them, but in a way that pushes them to be better." "Diplomatic answer," Victor said, smirking faintly. "But accurate. Most people are too afraid of failure to push boundaries. It's why the world is full of mediocrity." Nina frowned, considering his words. "Or maybe they're just trying to survive," she countered. Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Survival and success aren't mutually exclusive, Nina. But they require different mindsets. Which one do you think you have?" She didn't know how to respond. The question felt too personal, too probing. Instead, she busied herself with tidying the room, avoiding his gaze. The afternoon brought an unexpected twist. As Nina helped Victor with his physical therapy, a task she hadn't anticipated but took on without complaint, he suddenly asked, "Why did you take this job?" She paused, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "Because I need the money," she admitted, deciding there was no point in lying. "My son is sick, and the medical bills are more than I can handle." Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "What's wrong with him?" "Autoimmune disorder," Nina said quietly. "He's only 7, but it's been one thing after another, hospital visits, treatments, medications. It's overwhelming." Victor nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. "And you think this job will solve everything?" "No," she said honestly. "But it's a start." "I'm not," she said, meeting his gaze. "You're still running an empire. You're still making an impact. And from what I've seen, you're not the kind of man who lets anything stop him." Victor's expression softened, just slightly, but his eyes remained guarded. "You don't know me, Nina." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But I've seen enough to know you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." He didn't respond, but she could tell her words had struck a chord. For the rest of the morning, Victor was quieter than usual, his sharp remarks replaced by a brooding silence. Nina worked diligently, giving him space while still ensuring everything ran smoothly. After lunch, an unexpected visitor arrived at the estate. A woman in her late 50s, dressed in a simple but elegant navy suit, walked through the front doors with the confidence of someone who belonged. Graham greeted her warmly and led her to Victor's study. "Who is that?" Nina asked Graham as they passed. "Dr. Evelyn Carter," he replied. "She's Mr. Langston's physical therapist." Nina was intrigued. She hadn't realized Victor was still undergoing therapy. She decided to observe discreetly from the hallway, curious to see how the session would unfold. Dr. Carter greeted Victor with a warm smile. "How are we feeling today?" she asked. Victor scowled. "It's the anniversary." Dr. Carter nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I see. Well, let's channel some of that energy into our session, shall we?" Victor didn't protest, which surprised Nina. She watched as Dr. Carter guided him through a series of exercises, pushing him to stretch and strengthen his upper body. Despite his reluctance, Victor complied, his determination evident in the way he gritted his teeth and powered through the discomfort. "You're stronger than you think, Victor," Dr. Carter said at one point. "And I don't just mean physically." Victor didn't respond, but his expression was thoughtful. After the session ended, Dr. Carter approached Nina in the hallway. "You must be the new caregiver," she said with a kind smile. "Yes," Nina replied. "I'm Nina." "Victor's a tough one," Dr. Carter said, her tone conspiratorial. "But don't let him fool you. Beneath all that gruffness, there's a heart." Nina smiled. "I'm starting to see that." As the day came to a close, Nina helped Victor settle into his evening routine. He was quieter than usual, his earlier outburst replaced by a subdued demeanor. As she prepared to leave, he surprised her by saying, "You did well today." It wasn't much, but coming from Victor Langston, it felt like high praise. Nina smiled. "Thank you." As she drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about Victor's story, his pain, and the strength he didn't realize he still had. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself and Ethan, but for Victor too. Perhaps, in some strange way, they were helping each other heal. What she didn't know was that the days ahead would reveal even deeper layers to Victor's story, and her own life would be changed in ways she could never have imagined. The fifth day at the Langston estate began with a heavy downpour, the rain hammering against the windows as if mirroring the turbulent emotions swirling in Nina's mind. The house felt unusually quiet as she stepped inside, Graham greeting her with his usual reserved nod. But something about his expression seemed off, as if he was bracing himself for an impending storm. "Mr. Langston is in the conservatory," Graham said. "He requested not to be disturbed, but knowing him, he'll likely want your assistance soon." Nina nodded, slipping off her coat and heading toward the conservatory. It was a part of the house she hadn't yet seen, tucked away at the far end of the estate. When she opened the door, the sheer beauty of the space took her breath away. The room was filled with lush greenery, vibrant flowers, and the faint scent of earth after rain. A glass ceiling allowed the gray sky above to cast a moody light over the scene. In the middle of it all was Victor, sitting in his wheelchair near a small table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. He didn't look up as she entered, his gaze fixed on the rain cascading down the glass walls. For a moment, Nina debated whether to leave him alone, but then she remembered Graham's words. Victor might have requested solitude, but he rarely seemed to mean it. "Good morning," she said softly, stepping into the room. Victor glanced at her briefly before turning back to the rain. "Is it?" "You don't seem convinced," she replied, moving closer. He let out a dry chuckle, the sound more bitter than amused. "I suppose mornings like this are supposed to feel refreshing. Cleansing, even. But all I see is a storm." Nina pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Sometimes storms are necessary," she said. "They clear away the old and make room for new growth." Victor raised an eyebrow at her. "Poetic. I didn't know you had a philosophical side." She smiled faintly. "I have a lot of sides you don't know about." For a moment, they sat in silence, the rain providing a soothing backdrop. Then, Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Did Graham tell you about the charity gala tomorrow night?" Nina blinked. "No, he didn't." "Of course not," Victor muttered. "He probably assumed I wouldn't want to go." "And he'd be right. Why wouldn't you want to go?" Nina asked. "It sounds like an important event." "It is," Victor admitted. "But it's also a spectacle. A room full of people pretending to care about causes they don't truly understand, all while whispering behind my back about how far I've fallen." "Maybe they're not whispering as much as you think," Nina said carefully. "And even if they are, does it matter? You're still doing something good by being there." Victor's lips twisted into a wry smile. "You're surprisingly good at pep talks." "It's a skill," Nina replied lightly. "So, are you going?" Victor hesitated, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest of his wheelchair. "I don't know yet. I haven't decided if I have the patience for their pity." "Maybe it's not about them," Nina said. "Maybe it's about showing up for yourself. Reminding them, and yourself, what you're capable of." Victor studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes searching hers. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," she said firmly. He nodded slowly, as if filing her words away for later consideration. Then he changed the subject abruptly. "Today's schedule is light. I cancelled most of my meetings." Nina wasn't sure if this was a good or bad sign, but she decided not to press. Instead, she followed him through his usual routine, helping with physical therapy, paperwork, and lunch. Victor seemed more introspective than usual, his mind clearly preoccupied with something he wasn't ready to share. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A young man in his mid-20s arrived at the estate, his sandy blonde hair slightly disheveled and his suit just a touch too loose. He introduced himself as Andrew, one of the engineers working on Victor's prosthetic limb project. "I thought we weren't scheduled for a meeting today," Victor said, his tone sharp but not unkind. "We weren't," Andrew admitted, shifting nervously. "But I wanted to show you something. It's a prototype." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You're bringing me a prototype without it being cleared by the team?" Andrew swallowed hard. "I thought you'd want to see it first." For a moment, Victor said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured for Andrew to proceed. The young man opened a sleek case he had brought with him, revealing a lightweight, advanced prosthetic limb. It was a marvel of engineering, its design both functional and elegant. Victor's gaze lingered on the limb, a flicker of something, hope, fear, longing, crossing his face. "Does it work?" he asked finally. Andrew hesitated. "It's still in the testing phase, but we've made significant progress. I think it's close." Victor reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the prosthetic. "Close isn't good enough," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know," Andrew said quickly. "But with your input, we can refine it. Make it better." Victor's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Nina thought he might dismiss the young man entirely. But then he nodded. "Leave it here. I'll take a look." Andrew's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. I'll send over the technical specs this evening." As Andrew left, Victor turned to Nina. "What do you think?" "About the prosthetic?" she asked. "About him," Victor clarified. "Do you think he has what it takes?" Nina considered the question. "He seems passionate. And he took a risk coming here without the team's approval. That says something." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "Passion is good. Risk-taking is better. But it's results that matter." "I think he'll deliver," Nina said. "And I think you want him to." Victor gave her a faint smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're an optimist, Nina." "Someone has to be," she replied. That evening, as Nina prepared to leave, Victor stopped her. "About the gala tomorrow." "Yes," she prompted. "Would you come?" he asked, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. Nina blinked in surprise. "Me? At a gala?" "You're good at dealing with people," he said. "And I'd prefer not to go alone." For a moment, Nina was too stunned to respond. Then she smiled. "If you want me there, I'll be there." Victor nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Good. Be ready by 6. As Nina drove home, her mind buzzed with thoughts about the day. Victor Langston was a man full of contradictions, sharp yet vulnerable, guarded yet willing to take risks. And somehow, against all odds, she was beginning to see past his walls. Tomorrow's gala promised to be yet another turning point, one that could bring them closer to understanding the strange bond that was forming between them. Little did she know, the events of the night would uncover secrets and truths neither of them were prepared for. Nina felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I'm glad I could help," she said. "But you don't need me here to prove anything. You're stronger than you think, Victor." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Am I?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And I think you're starting to believe it too." Before he could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a tall, elegantly dressed woman. Her sharp features and confident demeanor immediately commanded attention. Nina recognized her from the whispers earlier, Victoria Langston, Victor's estranged sister. Well, Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. If it isn't my prodigal brother. And who's this? Victor's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Victoria. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly, she said, her gaze shifting to Nina. And you are? Nina, she said, holding out her hand. I work with Victor. Victoria ignored the gesture, her attention already back on her brother. I see you've been busy. Though I can't imagine what's brought you out of your self-imposed exile. Victor's expression hardened. I don't have time for your games tonight, Victoria. Oh, don't worry, she said with a sly smile. I'm not here to ruin your evening. Just to remind you that some of us still remember who you were before all this. With that, she turned and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Nina looked at Victor, her heart aching at the pain in his eyes. But before she could say anything, he straightened in his wheelchair, his expression hardening into resolve. Let's go back inside, he said. Are you sure? Nina asked. He nodded. I've spent too much time letting people like her dictate how I feel. It's time to take that power back. As they returned to the gala, Nina felt a sense of pride swell within her. Victor Langston was a man rebuilding himself piece by piece, and she was honored to be a part of that journey. But she also knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The events of the night had only scratched the surface of the challenges and revelations still to come.